you belong here. As I say those words, you belong here, they're very heavy words. Have you ever been somewhere where you felt like, I don't belong here? I think one of the worst feelings in the world is to end up somewhere and feel like, I don't belong here. It happens to me all the time. No, but one time in particular really stands out is I'd started my PhD program at Trinity in Deerfield, Illinois, outside of Chicago, and I was the youngest student they had ever accepted in the PhD program. I was 27 years old, and I hadn't been there long. I'm going to class, and I started to feel like I don't belong here. You know, they're talking about qualitative versus quantitative research methods and ethnographies, and I didn't know anything about what they were talking about. And I'm barely hanging on. And there's actually something called the imposter syndrome. And maybe you felt it, that you're in a place and you feel like they're going to find out I'm an imposter. I felt someone's going to come up and one day tap me on the shoulder and said, it was a big mistake that we let you in. I just didn't feel like I belonged there. But I was doing the work. I was keeping up. I was getting decent grades. And then close to the end of the first year, the chair of our department, Dr. Perry Downs, he calls me in his office. And he said, hey, Palmer, he said, some of the professors are saying, you're not really keeping up with the work. You're turning in work late. That you left for 2 weeks to go to Cuba and Costa Rica in the middle of the semester, and I did. And they said, they're having study groups on campus, and you're not showing up for them. And I said, Dr. Downs, you understand? I live an hour away in Wheaton. I'm just trying to do the work. And he keeps asking these questions. Finally, I said, Dr. Downs, are you asking, do I want to quit the program? Are you asking me to quit the program? He said, yeah, I'm asking if you want to quit the program. And I was like, oh. And I said, no, Dr. Downs, you don't understand. I said, I'm leading a big college ministry. I have 3 sons right now. I said, I know I live an hour away, but I can do this. I said, I know God has plans for this PhD in education. He's going to use it one day. Who knew to start Justice College? But one day, I knew he would use it. And I said, plus, Dr. Downs, I've never quit anything in my life, so I'm not going to quit this. He said, I was hoping you'd say that. Get back to class. Okay. And he said, some of the professors just wanted me to ask you that. But man, it's a terrible feeling, isn't it? That you feel like you don't belong here, like you're in the wrong place. It's one of our primal fears, isn't it? Speaking about fears, and this is leading to where the Christmas story starts, because there's a story that is rooted in fear. But we all have this primal fear of, I don't belong here. And maybe you don't know it, but it's rooted in this. I have a picture of a baobab tree here. Now, if you've ever been on a walking safari, this is a reason to be afraid. And why is that? Because if you're on a walking safari in Africa and your guide is taking you past this tree, what is going through your mind? What are you asking yourself? You're asking yourself, is there a lion lurking behind the tree? Am I right about this? Behind every thicket you walk past, you're asking yourself, is there a lion behind the tree? And every impala, every kudu that walks past this baobab tree is asking themselves the same question. Is there a lion behind the tree? Your brain is wired to do that. Your brain is constantly doing threat assessment. Now, here in Chandler, Arizona, when you walk past a tree, you're not asking yourself, is there a lion behind the tree? Is there? But do you know this? Your brain is constantly scanning the world around you, because this has been in your DNA for generations, at doing threat assessment. Maybe you've been laying in bed at night recently and your mind is racing with all your fears. You may not walk past baobab, but you have fears, all right? You have fears. You're laying in bed at night and your mind is racing with fears about your children, fears about your job, fears about finances and money, or you have fears about friendships and relationships, but you have those fears. It's because your brain is constantly doing this threat assessment. Now, what's the key to surviving? If you're a kudu in Africa, or if you're walking past this street, the key to survival is being a part of the herd. So I have a picture here of a kudu herd. And if you've ever been on a safari in Africa, the kudu are always looking around. Some are eating, but some are constantly scanning the horizon. Yes, they're looking out for threats out there, what to be afraid of. But do you know why the kudu is always looking around also? It's assessing its relationship to the herd. It's wondering, am I still a part of the herd? Because if the kudu wanders off for greener grass over here and is not paying attention, and the herd moves and it's left by itself, what happens? I have a next picture here. You are now lion bait, all right? Being a part of the herd, staying with the herd is a matter of life and death. Now, you're not a kudu, you're a human being, but we live with those same kind of fears. We live with those fears that if I get separated from my tribe, if I get separated from people around me that care about me, I'll end up by myself. That's why, if you've ever thought about doing something new, if you've ever thought about doing something daring, starting your own business, launching a nonprofit, if you've ever thought about becoming an artist and painting in public or playing the guitar, if you've ever thought about those things, what's the first thought that goes through your mind? What will my friends say? Will they mock me? Will they ridicule me? Will they beat down this idea and criticize me? Why is our mind asking that question? Because we're assessing, we're monitoring our standing, our relationship with our herd, with our tribe. We want to make sure that we're still on the inside and not on the outside. Because, like I began by saying, one of the worst feelings in the world is, I don't belong here. That's where the Christmas story starts. So grab your Bibles, and we're going to start in Luke chapter 1. And I want to talk about hope this morning, how there's hope for the frightened. There's hope for everyone who's afraid. There's a hope for everyone who feels they might be left out and they don't belong. You belong here. So Luke chapter 1, I'm going to start reading in verse 26. God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you're highly favored, the Lord is with you." And Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. And the angel says, "Do not be afraid. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus." So, of course, Mary's afraid. Of course, the angel says, don't be afraid. Why is Mary afraid? Her fear is rooted in this idea of a young Palestinian girl, and a girl in Palestine, becoming pregnant before she is married or when she's just engaged. Mary's fear was rooted in shame and rejection. Do you see that? Her fear is rooted in the fact that I may be judged by my village and my family, by my husband-to-be, and I will be pushed out of the society that I value. We need to pause here and really understand what it's like for a teenage girl of her day to be told that she's going to have a baby. Because being engaged in first century Israel is not the same as being engaged in America. All right, being engaged there meant, for all intents and purposes, you are married. Only one major drawback: you can't share a bed together. Big major drawback. Anyway, apart from that, you were considered married. In first century Israel, if this girl was found to be pregnant or was guilty of adultery, she would be ostracized from society. She would be called sota. The book of Numbers chapter 22 says you can stone her. That's the book of Deuteronomy. Numbers says give her the bitter water test. The bitter water test is if she drinks the bitter water and she gets sick, then she's guilty. If she's guilty, the priest would take her out to the front gate of her town and shame her there. He would make her let her hair down, and then he would rip her clothes, and then he would rip off her jewelry, and he would leave her at the town gate for the rest of the day so that all the other young women could see the shame that she's endured because of her unfaithfulness. She would be called sota, the unfaithful one. So Joseph, he has the same fears because it's not any easier for him. So turn over to Matthew in your Bible. I'm going to start reading at verse 20. And Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and did not want to expose her to public disgrace. This is after he finds out she's pregnant. And he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid." So do you see that Joseph has fears as well? Joseph's fears, like Mary's, are rooted in the fear of shame and rejection, that he would be shamed in his village, shamed in front of his family. His peers would mock him. What kind of husband are you that this baby is from someone else? And so because of this fear of rejection, Joseph is afraid. And I want to say this. So what fears are haunting you today? What shame is making you feel like you might be pushed out? What shames are you trying to hide? I think, like I said earlier, fear is almost always connected to shame. And I wonder today, what fears or shame are making you feel like a failure? Because that's what our fear is rooted in. Fear and shame are tightly connected. Our fear is that people will find out about our failures, our inadequacies, our problems, and our troubles, and they will reject us. That's what our fear is rooted in. And then we feel shame. When the first Minions movie came out, it was titled Despicable Me. Remember that? And if you remember the movie, there was Miss Hattie. She ran the orphanage. And if one of the little girls disobeyed her or frustrated her, then I have a picture here, she would put the girl in the box of shame. All right? And sometimes she'd have 2 or 3 girls in the box of shame at the same time. And don't raise your hand, it's rhetorical, but if you ever felt like you ended up in the box of shame, that you did something that has shamed you, I think all of us fear the rejection and the feeling of being in the box of shame. I think we feel like we'll end up in the box of shame if someone finds out about my divorce. We feel like we end up in the box of shame if someone finds out about my unemployment, or they find out about my bankruptcy, or if they find out about my unfaithful spouse, or if they find out about my foreclosure or my addiction or my problems at work. If they find out about those things, then I'll end up in the box of shame. And so because of the fear of shame, what do we do with our troubles and our problems? We hide them. We try to suppress them. We try to hide them so that nobody finds out about them. I know that's true because it happens with me. You know, like the rest of you, I've tried to hide the things that are wrong with me. I say that in particular when I think about the first time I had basal cell carcinoma right here. So I'd gone to my dermatologist, and she finds some kind of thing here that won't heal, and she says, she has it checked, and she says, you have basal cell carcinoma, and I'm in her office, she says, we need to cut it out. I said, well, make sure you get it all. Don't ever say that, by the way. Don't ever say that. And so she leaves. She says, hey, I have an intern who's learning, and I'd like her to experience this and let her do it. So my dermatologist leaves, and the intern comes in. You know, she might have been 17 or 18. She looked 12, all right? And she comes in with a scalpel. And I said, have you done this before? She says, no. I said, great. All right. And so she starts cutting, and she's sawing. I don't think it's a sawing motion, but it's like she's cutting sirloin. And she's just sawing away, hacking here. And I already told the dermatologist, get it all. Don't be shy. I said that. Don't say that. And she's cutting away, and it's bleeding now. She's yelling for help. Hey, I need help. I got a bleeder. And so, you know, she's got people coming in. And then she finally gets to the sewing part. Oh, my goodness. She's never done this before, I can tell. And it's like she's lacing up a football. And I go home. I think I'm going to have a scar like a half an inch. That's in my mind. That's what I'm picturing. When I look in the mirror, I'm horrified. It's like, I know I'm exaggerating, but it looked like it was 6 inches. Like, I felt like I looked like Son of Frankenstein with this big football stitching across here. And I was like, man, what am I going to do? And plus, we're going to Cancun in 2 weeks with a bunch of friends. And I've got this giant scar here. So the intern, the one who didn't know how to cut things, well, it tells me, she says, if you want to hide the scar, go down to Walgreens. They sell scar cream, all right? So I bought me some scar cream, and I lather it on there. Can I just tell you, if you've invested in Mederma, sell your stock, okay? The stuff doesn't work, all right? I did it for a week, and nothing's changing, and we're leaving for Cancun in a few days. So I did something brilliant, all right? I did exactly what you would do. I went to Claire's. It's a jewelry store in the mall. And it's where junior hires buy their jewelry. And so I go down there, and I start looking for medallions, and I find this big gold medallion. I'm not making this up, all right? It's so bad. I'm not making it up. You'd have to make it up. And I buy this giant medallion that will hang right here on my neck and kind of hide the scar. I look like a rapper with a thing. And I go to Cancun like that. That's how I go to Cancun. I got more business about my gold medallion than I ever would about the scar. But we do that, don't we? We think there's something wrong with us, and so we try to hide it. You've done that. But the trouble with most of our scars is that they're not physical, and you can't hide them. But we try to hide the problems in our lives with cheap things. Maybe it's a new outfit, maybe it's a new car, maybe it's a new job, maybe it's a new friend, trying to cover up what's going on the inside instead of being honest. But what's so amazing about the Christmas story, what's so refreshing about the Christmas story, is that the shamed ones become the blessed ones. And that's your story. When you come to where Jesus is and you worship him and you come into the stable with the shamed ones, you go from being the shamed one to being the blessed one. That's what Mary says about herself. She sees this. You can look at it with me. Mary's song is in Luke chapter 1. We don't have time to, I'm not reading the whole thing, but here's just a bit of it. And Mary sings, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. From now on," she sings, "all generations will call me blessed." That's what she says. She goes from being the shamed one, and she realizes that she is the blessed one. And I want to say, it's the same for you and for me. Whatever shame or inadequacy you're feeling, whatever shame is causing that fear in your life, let it go. When you come to Christ like she does, then that shame, you go from being the shamed one to the blessed one. I want to say next that there's hope. As we read this Christmas story, there's hope for the left out and the down and out. I think one of our primal fears that I began by saying is that we will be left on the outside. That whatever circle of friends in society you belong to, our fear is that we will be pushed out and left out. One of the best feelings in life is to be welcomed in, isn't it? To be invited in. I don't know if you've ever ended up at a wedding and the only people you knew at the wedding were the bride and the groom. Has that ever happened to you? And it seems like everyone else, they're telling jokes, they have inside stories, they've known each other since junior high school, but not you. You're there by yourself. You feel like an outsider. There's no one to talk to. And so what do? You go to the charcuterie board, don't you? And you just stand there. Like the charcuterie is the most interesting thing in the world. And you're just hanging out there. You're eating salami and miniature pickles by the handful, you know. You're there for an hour. You're about to yak it all up. You're there forever. And then you see somebody coming your way. And they're not looking at the charcuterie board. They're walking right at you. And they're like, you're thinking, oh no, they're going to ask me, do I belong here? They're going to ask me to leave like I snuck in the place. Well, I didn't. But instead, this person comes up. And they introduce themselves, and they say, "What's your name?" And you say, "Well, my name's Bob." And they say, "Well, tell me about yourself, Bob." And so you tell them your story. And they say, "Hey, Bob, well, why don't you come with me? I've got a bunch of friends at the table over here. Why don't you join us?" And so he pulls up a chair, and now you're at this round table and your brand new friend says to everyone at the table, "Hey, you've got to meet Bob. Bob's the most interesting man in the world. You got to hear his story right now." Now, how do you feel now? You feel like you're on the inside. You feel like you belong. That's the Christmas story. The Christmas story is about the outsiders, the down and out, being invited to the inside. This is a story of the shepherds. Luke chapter 2, verse 8. There were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born." Verse 16, so they hurried off, and they found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was laying in the manger. When you read this Christmas story, some say the Christmas story is scandalous. Because why, if God is sending the King of Kings, why doesn't he send him to the kings first? Why doesn't he send him to the priests and the religious ones? Why would he send him to the shepherds first? You see, the shepherds, God doesn't send Jesus to the first class or to the highest class. he sends them to the lowest class, to the second class. That's who he goes to first, to the undeserving and the undesirables. You have to understand where shepherds stood in Palestinian society. Shepherds were on the lowest rung of Hebrew society. Priests would mock them for their reputation. They had the same social standing as dung sweepers. That's who they were. Zephaniah used them as symbols of judgment and social desolation. Everybody looked down on shepherds. They were not allowed, they didn't trust shepherds. They weren't allowed to testify in court. In fact, the Mishnah, which is a written record of the Hebrew law, is that if you found a shepherd in a pit, you have no obligation to pull them out. All right, that's what people thought of shepherds. But Jesus' delivery room is filled with shepherds and a mother and a father who all feel like they don't deserve this. We could call it the barn of undesirables, isn't it? That's who's filling the barn. Brennan Manning, my favorite contemplative writer, he calls it the shipwrecked at the stable, because it's the second class, it's the left out and the down and out who end up at the stable. And Brennan Manning knows what it's like to be a shipwrecked per human being, all right? A shipwrecked at the stable. Because Brennan Manning was shipwrecked himself. I don't know if you know his story, but at a young age, he'd become a priest. And then he became an alcoholic and began to eat up his life. And he ended up leaving his church to sleep on park benches in Long Beach. And then Brennan says that one morning he's waking up, with a hangover, trying to get his thoughts together. He says, when I hear Jesus Christ speak to me, as clear as I'm speaking to you right now, and he says that Jesus said, Brennan, I still love you. And so Brennan knows what it's like to be shipwrecked, to be an undesirable, and still have Jesus care about you and love you. So Brennan Manning writes this book, The Ragamuffin Gospel. It's one of my favorite books on my shelf. And it has this great paragraph in it where Brennan writes, Jesus spent a disproportionate amount of time with the people described in the Gospels as the poor, the blind, the lame, the lepers, the hungry, the sinners, the prostitutes, tax collectors, the persecuted, the downtrodden, the little ones, the least, the last, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. In short, Jesus hung out with the ragamuffins. And that's what he did. He hung out. He was born in a barn of undesirables. I hope that you see this morning that Jesus being born in the middle of people who felt undeserving is a reminder to all of us that when he came to love and to rescue you and me. And he came to rescue all of us. And no matter what mistakes you've made, maybe you have messed up, maybe you have failed, maybe you have hurt someone, maybe you've been dishonest, maybe you've damaged a relationship, maybe you've given in to an addiction. And I want to remind you today that when you come to the manger, when you come to Christ, all of that is gone. And you are no longer the undesirable one. Now you are the treasured one. You are the prized one. You're the apple of God's eye. I want to end this morning by reminding you of this, that there's hope for everyone, and that you belong here. You belong here, not just as a Christian, but you belong in this church. You belong at the Grove. Because at the Grove, we're not a ballroom of perfectly put together people. We're not. We are just a gathering, a tribe of imperfect people, hoping and believing that God can change us and use me and do his work in me and save me. This church is not a place where you have to have your act together before you come to church here. You don't. Some people think, there was a church in town that had a sign out front for a while that said, no perfect people allowed. I thought, that's a great sign. We need that sign at the Grove, no perfect people allowed. But then the church closed and went out of business. So I don't know. I don't know if people thought you have to be perfect to show up there, so they just didn't show up. But this church isn't a place where you have to have your act together. It's a place where you can come and in your rawness be accepted by us and by Jesus Christ. We don't read in the Bible that the shepherds when they were invited to come to the manger, they didn't go home and take a shower and put on clean clothes and some Old Spice and Polo Ralph Lauren cologne. They didn't do that. They just came as they were. And I think sometimes we forget that even Christians have struggles and problems, that even churches have struggles and problems, that even pastors and their families have struggles and problems. When Jesus gave his first talk, so this is not baby Jesus, this is grown-up Jesus, but when he gave his first message, he said this about his kind of kingdom. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." He said, "Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are you who are poor." He says, "Blessed are the hungry. Blessed are the weak. Blessed are you when you're excluded. Blessed are the rejected, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Do you see that? The kingdom of heaven belongs to you and me. When Christ enters the world of your life, we all move from being the shamed ones and the despicable ones to being the honored ones. There's two truths that I hope you leave here with today. One, we all are a bit imperfect. We all have trouble and problems. We're all flawed. This has been the case since Adam. But two, I want you to know that you belong here. This is a worship house of healing. Just like the stable where Jesus was born, the imperfect came, the shamed ones became the blessed ones. So, can you help me with something here? That whenever someone new comes in this place, would you remind them and tell them that you belong here? I was at a meeting this last week with some of the leaders from Chandler Unified School District, and one of the executive directors was sharing how they've implemented a new policy in CUSD, that in the high schools, whenever a student is suspended now, that whoever suspended them, whatever administrator, whatever principal gave them the suspension, that administrator, that principal is now required to meet after the student has been gone for 4 days or 5 days or 3 days, however long the suspension was. When that student comes back, the administrator, the principal, is required to meet them at the front gate and say, "Welcome back. You belong here." Isn't that great? Because they felt like they've been shamed, they've been sent on the outside, they felt like this isn't where they belong, and now they're being told, "No, this is where you belong." Would you help me do that here at the Grove? That whenever you meet someone new who's coming onto our campus for the first time, would you tell them, "You belong here"? And maybe it's someone who's suspending themselves from here. They just left. And when you see them come back, will you tell them, "You belong here"? So can I leave you with this challenge? To give yourself completely to this worshiping community. Maybe you've been staying on the fringes, staying on the edges. I want to challenge you to pour into community here. If there's someone sitting near you that you haven't gotten to know yet, well, invite them out to lunch. Build friendships here. Give yourself to hosting a life group, joining a life group, pouring into a life group. Have people in your home. Teach Sunday school here. Go to Mexico with us, or Malawi with us, or Thailand with us, and build some lifelong friendships. Give yourself completely to community here, because something very transformational happens here when you do that. You move from being the one who's filled with fear and shame to the one who is blessed. In spite of all our imperfections, I want you to know that when you come, like in this barn of undesirables we read at Jesus' birth, all of us like that become clean and new and brand new people. You are no longer the shamed one. You're the blessed one. You belong here, and there's hope for everyone. I hope you know that today. Would you stand and sing these words together? There's hope for everyone.